Decorating cakes is really easy. You only need to know 3 basic techniques, and it's fun to practice with buttercream. It makes a cake look really decorative. And it's especially easy these days because you can use disposable bags which just get tossed. You don't have to wash them. Or you can even use a resealable plastic bag that is food grade. Just make a cuff, clip the end, and the best part is that the buttercream can't work its way out the top, especially when kids are playing with it. Alternatively, with these bags, you can use a twisty tie. Of course, when you get more proficient, you don't have to do that. There are also the old-fashioned nylon bags, which are really more comfortable to hold, but then of course you have to wash them. Now the way to prepare a bag, either a disposable or a zip seal type of bag, resealable bag, is to cut off the tip. And you would never want to do a straight cut because you're putting a round tube in so that the buttercream will work out the little pointy edges at the side. You cut it like a smile, an upside down smile. And I always go with a smaller cut because you can always enlarge it, but if you make it too big, then the coupler goes right through it. And all you need to do really is to set it into another bag. You don't have to empty out your frosting if you've done that by mistake. A coupler is very useful if you want to change tips. So this one is used for the small decorating tips, and this round tip is the one that I use very often to make balls. And because it's a relatively thin plastic and not nylon, even if it's a little bit too tight, better too tight, because it's a snug fit, you can enlarge it because it will stretch. And you see these grooves in the coupler? That will hold this part of it securely on. And when you want to change tips, you just take off the coupler, put another tip on. So it's really handy. Now this is a piping tube that's much larger, and I've cut my bag again with a little semicircle just to the point. No icing is going to creep through the sides because you see it's perfectly round, but you can see all the articulation of the tip, all those sharp edges. If the bag were partially cutting them off, it would squish the frosting and you wouldn't get a beautiful design. And when I'm alone in the kitchen, which is most of the time, as so many of us are, I use a beaker or a large glass and I make a cuff, and that's how I can fill the bag. I also have standing by a bowl of ice water because if it's warm, or if my hand gets warm, as I'm holding the bag, the decorations begin to lose all their definition. They get to be little puddles. But if you dip your hand in ice water briefly and then just dry it with a towel, you can keep going for just about indefinitely. This is mousseline buttercream. I think of it as the queen of buttercreams. If ganache is the king, then mousseline is the queen. Hot syrup is beaten into egg white to make this buttercream, and then it's beaten into butter. And you can see as it sits, it gets really spongy, which is delicious to eat because it's lighter. But when you want to pipe it, you want it to be as smooth and creamy as possible. So I use my little whisk. It's made by Henkel's, and it's just the perfect size for so many things. Larger whisks, as you can imagine, would be harder to use for all the little things that you do. And you can see it's nice and spongy now, but the minute I whisk it a little, it will become like silk. And this buttercream pipes like a dream. It's important not to overfill the bag unless you have a really large hand, then you can fill it more full, because it's hard to squeeze when the bag gets too full. But you can only fill it one time, then you have to squeeze out all the rest and add the new batch, because if there is a gap between the 2 additions of the buttercream, as you're in the middle of piping on the cake, you'll have a sudden poof, and the buttercream will splatter and it will ruin the decoration. So these are all my little tips for making decorating a breeze. See, now it's really smooth and creamy. And I'll start with my favorite, the star. Take a couple of dollops. And the way to make sure that you don't have air pockets, even in your one edition, is to use what is called a bench scraper. You can use the side of your hand too, but most bakers, especially professional bakers, all professional bakers, consider the bench scraper as their second hand, or third hand, I should say. use it to pick up dough, to just every single task in baking ends up using a bench scraper as well. So you see I'm pressing it forward. And here's how I keep it from escaping. I hold it and I twist it between my fingers. Now I'm going to fill the zip seal bag, so that will be ready. A resealable food grade bag that we've used here. And with that, I'm going to make little balls, which are really pretty to decorate the edge of the cake. So you don't want to see the cardboard, especially if you're doing a wedding cake and you're tiering the cakes. You need something to disguise that rough edge, and the little balls are just perfect. And before you close it, to get rid of all the air, again, press it forward. It only goes so far, but it's all compact, and then you'll use your hand and the pressure to make it come through the tip. So now this is all ready to go as well. Now for a star, you're just holding the tube straight up and down, and I'm just using a dark tray instead of a cake so that you can really see the contrast of what it looks like. But of course, if you're doing it on a turntable with a cake, it will be closer to you and you won't have to bend down, which is a good idea. Keep squeezing and then stop squeezing completely and bring it up. Now this is a little bit cold. If it were softer, I would get a nice high peak, but it looks pretty this way too. Now if I wanted to get a nice peak, what I would do is I would empty it back out and just let it sit until it warms up. Most kitchens are at least 75 degrees, if not 80, and that would be a perfect temperature, but it's about 70 in here. But you'll see if I do a few, they start getting to be softer, even if you don't want it to be. And if you want to tip, you continue squeezing a little bit as you pull away. But look what happens if I continue squeezing as I'm pulling away too much. It just gets higher and higher. So most people think they've stopped squeezing, but until you can wiggle your fingers, you don't know for sure that you really have. So you stop like that and then lift up. And if you have a little hole in the center, you can use it to put a dragée also, which can be an interesting decoration. Another favorite is a shell. And that's a little harder to do than a star, but not really much. It just takes practice. You start by holding it instead of straight up and down at a slight angle. And when it puffs out enough and spreads sideways, start bringing it back, continuing to squeeze this time until you draw it to a nice point. And then the next one is started right behind it. And the force of the buttercream makes it go up and cover the one before. See, a neoclassic buttercream would be pointier, but it also would be denser, and I really like the sponginess of the mousseline. And even if your edge is not perfect, or your tail, it's going to be covered by the next decoration. See how it goes forward and up. And another nice variation is to do it sideways. This is the beginning of a rosette. See, I keep squeezing it to force the icing forward and keep it from going backwards. You start again at the edge and then circle around and bring it down. And then you can alternate, either go both the same direction both ones, or go the opposite direction for the next one. And this is a beautiful border on the side of a cake. Now normally if it's a 9-inch cake, I would use a small tip. But if I'm using whipped cream, I like using large tips because then you can eat more of the decoration. You always have to think in terms of what looks good, but also what you're going to want to eat. So this is using the large tube, and now using the small one to make the balls.